Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Jen Reed with the Science Collaborative, and I'm joined today by Megan Brass, Lynn Vaccaro, and Nick Soberall with our Science Collaborative team here in Ann Arbor. We also have team members from our Centralized Data Management Office, as well as our NOAA Program Officer, Dwight Trueblood, also attending the webinar. Just a few things before we get started. We are recording this webinar, and we will be posting a copy of the slides and the recording to the Science Transfer Funding Opportunity page on our website when we wrap up. And then we will add the answers to all the questions to our running Q&A document for the RFP. It's also on that Science Transfer Funding page. So if there's something you want to revisit, that is the place to check after we wrap up today. Right now, all attendees are in listen-only mode, as you probably noted when you came on board, and that's really to ensure good sound quality. Please use the question function on the GoToWebinar console to enter your questions as they occur to you throughout the webinar. We will have a few slides up front and a few things to share, and then we're going to jump into those questions. We'll answer those written questions first and then unmute everyone to take questions verbally. Before we get underway, we have a couple of quick questions to get a sense of where everyone is as far as experience with the Science Collaborative and with Science Transfer. So we're going to launch a couple of questions, quick polls. Our first question, the more general one, is trying to get a sense of how folks have been engaged with Science Collaborative RFPs in the past before. And it looks like about half of the folks on our webinar today have participated in Science Collaborative RFP in the past, and we've got some new folks joining us today, so that's exciting. We're excited about that. Our next poll question is looking at whether how engaged you've been in science transfer in the past. So if you're just getting up to speed on this RFP, maybe you've got a few ideas in mind, or you know for sure you're submitting a science transfer proposal. We'd really like to get a sense of where everyone is in that group. So this looks great. We've got definitely a lot of folks who are thinking about ideas or have ideas in mind, and I'm really hoping that this webinar will offer you sort of more food for thought and a way to move forward with your ideas. So here's what we're planning to do today. We'll give a quick overview of this request for proposal opportunity, including the timeline, some more details on requirements, talk a little bit about the review criteria and some example projects, just to give you some things to think about might generate some further questions that you haven't already thought of, and hopefully you've also come armed with your questions. For the majority of the conversation is going to be around the question and answer period. So just quickly and relatively high level here, as a reminder that the science transfer opportunity that's open now that this webinar is about is really designed to transfer science from really one location to another in many different ways. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail, but we're really looking at the use and application of science. Looking for projects that can last up to 2 years with awards up to $100,000 in total. We are really interested in funding a variety of projects with a range of scopes and budgets. And we want to be clear that we welcome proposals with budgets that are below that 100K maximum amount. Your budget should match your scope. And now here's a quick look at the timeline. Those proposals are due March 25th by midnight. We will be looking for those to be submitted through our online submission system. If you haven't participated in an RFP before, we just encourage you to start that submission process early so we can resolve any questions that might come up, any sort of technical issues. We don't anticipate those, but you don't want to hit that question at like 11:30 on March 25th. That's PM. You'd rather be hitting that like a week or two in advance. If you've looked at the RFP, you'll see that we ask the managers of each of the reserves with which a project is affiliated to provide an assessment to us. Those are due on April 1st. And we plan to go through the review process and notify teams of our decisions about funding and supporting projects toward the end of June. All projects should have a start date of October 1st. So a couple of quick sort of overview slides about science transfer projects, what they are and what they aren't. We really want to make it as clear as possible what the program's all about. So science transfer is really a chance to leverage existing research and bodies of scientific knowledge and put that science to work for the benefit of coastal communities and ecosystems. So let's talk first about that transfer component of science transfer. These projects can support a range of collaborations and information sharing that could include a transfer between programs within a single reserve, say from research or stewardship to coastal training or education. It can also support transfer between or among two or more reserves. So a reserve has developed a great methodology or a great approach, and there's a couple of other reserves that want to learn how to do that. Science transfer is an excellent opportunity for this. It could also be a transfer of information from a reserve to external partners, a way to help your external partners do their work better and support the work of and the goals of the reserve. Science transfer grants can support data analysis and the development of new decision support tools, but they're not intended to support entirely new data collection. There are a few cases where some data need to be collected that would be directly tied to the transfer activity. And examples of these would include needs assessment or user experience studies and evaluation efforts that would be intended to inform the development of a new program or product. There may also be in transferring a training activity or calibrating a tool that needs to be transferred, you may need to collect some field data or some social science data to support that. Otherwise, projects for this opportunity should not be seeking to collect new data. And there's additional guidance in the RFP about those sort of restrictions and guidelines, and we're happy to take questions during this webinar or over email afterwards as you think about it, and you might have further follow-up questions. But here's a good illustration of what we're talking about with science transfer, this notion of building a stronger and more connected national estuarine research reserve system and the networks within it. So this is an infographic that we developed recently that illustrates how ideas have been transferred among and between reserves in recent years around the topic of climate adaptation. It's this kind of connectivity that we want to support through the grant program. So a couple of slides here going over our sort of 3 required elements for all of the science transfer proposals. So first, all transfer proposals have to connect to at least one of the Science Collaborative focus areas that are listed here on this slide, also in the RFP. These are the focus areas that NOAA identified for the program to tackle over this 5-year period. Lots of projects can fit under these broad themes, but you really want to clearly and specifically identify where your project is specifically connected into which of these focus areas. I'm going to pass this over to Lynn here to talk about some specific characteristics of the program and offer some examples that illustrate them to go a little bit deeper into some of the things that I've talked about kind of from a generic perspective. She's going to give some more specific details. Lynn, it's over to you.
All right. Thank you, Jen, and good afternoon, everyone. So collaboration and end-user engagement are critical components of all science collaborative projects and are likely familiar terms to folks on this webinar, but just to be really clear, a project's end users are the intended users of the project activities and products. And our goal in emphasizing this responsiveness to end user needs is that it will help applicants be really specific about who their end users are and how those individuals will use and benefit from the work. So despite, the definition in the RFP might seem a little bit wordy, but we hope this framing feels pretty natural, especially for science transfer efforts. So a few more specific tips. Science transfer proposals must include at least one letter of support from an end user, and both the letter and the narrative of the proposal should explain at least 3 different things related to the end user engagement. The letter and the narrative should be specific about how a couple primary or maybe even a single primary end user has been engaged in the development of the proposal, how those users will continue to inform the project if it gets funded and moves forward, and how those users anticipate using and benefiting from the project. Reviewers will be looking for this information, and they also really like to see, personalized signed letters on the organization's letterhead, which really helps confirm that end users, are engaged, and that the proposal will indeed, meet their needs. We fully realize that these are small grants, so we encourage you to be targeted and efficient in your approach, focusing on just a couple primary end users, especially at the proposal development stage. So reserve engagement. All projects funded through the Science Collaborative must be directly tied to the work of at least one reserve. This means the proposed work plan should actively engage relevant reserve staff from the reserve system, and the proposal must be endorsed by the manager of the reserves that are named in the proposal. I'm going to just quickly explain how we confirm that a manager of a reserve is indeed supportive of a particular proposal. So for every reserve that's named on the title page of a proposal, we ask the managers of those reserves to complete a proposal assessment form. And those forms are submitted directly to us as a program, independent of the proposal, and they're due typically a week after the proposal deadline. The assessment forms are pretty simple, just requiring a yes/no response to 3 questions with space for optional comments. The questions are in the RFP, and a short version of them are here on this slide. And then one last reminder, applicants are responsible for providing a final copy of the proposal to the managers of those reserves that are named as collaborators on a proposal cover page. We don't do that as a program. So, review and selection process. So all science transfer proposals will be reviewed by a multidisciplinary panel composed of collaboration, communications, and outreach experts that also have some experience with coastal science and management. Those panelists will complete a written review of proposals, and then they'll come together to discuss and then rank order the proposals based on their recommendation for funding. Applicants at the end of the process will receive a copy of the written reviews as well as a summary of the panel discussion. And our hope is that the panel discussion summary should help resolve any big discrepancies in the written reviews, and also offer some constructive feedback to the team so that everybody learns from the process. So what will those reviewers be looking for? On the slide here are the 5 topics that our review forum covers. And within each of these 5 themes, there's a set of questions. And you can see in brackets there, how many questions fall underneath each of those themes. For example, reviewers will be asked to respond to 4 questions about a project's feasibility, including questions about the team, timeline, and budget. And the exact language of those questions is in the RFP itself. And it might be helpful to just note here that we equally weight each of those 13 evaluation questions when developing a summary score for a proposal. So this means that topics with more evaluation questions, such as the example of feasibility that I just talked about, will play a somewhat bigger role in determining a proposal's overall score. And we're happy to answer any additional questions about the review process if what's in the RFP isn't clear to folks. I'm going to move on now to 5 short project examples to help illustrate a range of potential science transfer projects. For each project, I'll highlight the activities the grant supported, the type of information transfer happening, which is illustrated in those blue text boxes at the bottom of the slide, and I'll point out the primary end users that benefited from the work. And of course, I'm going to leave out a lot of interesting aspects of these projects just to ensure that we have enough time for questions at the end. So the first example that's illustrated here on this slide was led by a research coordinator at Tijuana River Reserve in California. And they used the Science Transfer Grant to conduct a really targeted analysis of their monitoring data to inform a specific and timely management question. The project involved a really strong collaboration and transfer between the reserve's research and training programs and culminated in a workshop and summary report. In the proposal, they identified a very specific primary user for their findings, the Science Advisory Panel of the Southern California Wetland Recovery Project, which had recently been charged with developing guidance on whether and how to manage the opening of lagoons. So the project directly informed the work of that panel. So this is meant to just provide an illustration of how you can do some pretty technical data analyses within the science transfer program. So this next example is led by an education coordinator from Wells Reserve in Maine. And like the prior example, this project fostered a nice collaboration between programs at individual reserves. And the project also helped transfer ideas across 4 New England reserves that collaborated in this project. The grant funds with the Science Transfer Grant enabled the education coordinators to develop new lessons and also lead teacher training workshops around the increasingly important topic of climate change impacts for coastal habitats. Those new education materials incorporated current data and new methods from the reserve research and stewardship programs, hence that transfer within programs at the reserve. And just as an example, you can see in the photos there how one lesson used just classroom materials to demonstrate how surface elevation table equipment works, which is a relatively new addition to the reserve monitoring program. This next example here is led by a coastal training program coordinator from Jacques Cousteau Reserve in New Jersey. And for this project, grant funds were used to support a series of workshops in 4 different states. And for each 2-day workshop was based on a new training approach that had been piloted in New Jersey. And in this case, the Coastal Reserve training program staff were really key users for the project because they gained some new tools and skills to use in future workshops and in their other work. But each reserve also engaged additional local and regional partners in the workshops. And so the proposal presented, really both of those types of users for the work. So this example is led by a coastal training program coordinator from Ketchimak Bay in Alaska. And this project enabled a transfer of a new tool from an external partner, in this case a sea grant program in the Gulf region, to Alaska. The tool, a resilience index and self-assessment process, had actually been adapted as well for use by the Wells Reserve in Maine. So the project team used grant funds to conduct interviews and focus groups with their fishing community and fishery industry leaders, which enabled them to adapt and customize the tool for use in Alaska. And both the collaborative process as well as the tool is enabling the reserve to really better serve a key user and partner, fishery industry leaders and businesses. So a nice example of kind of transfer from an external partner and also benefiting an additional local external partner. And this last example here is led by the manager of Great Bay Reserve in New Hampshire. And similar to the last project, this team transferred a tool or really a process that had been used successfully in a different region. And they did that in order to better serve their local partners. The team facilitated a highly structured expert panel process to develop guidance that would be seen as credible and usable by their users. In addition to providing summaries of their technical findings, in this case, it was about calculating the pollutant removal rates for buffers, the team also documented their process so that others could pick up and use a similar method to address a different issue. So the team, did that to serve their New Hampshire users, but they also incorporated a transfer across reserves. So they did similar workshops at the end of the project in 2 adjacent states and have shared all of their tools, both the findings, the technical findings, as well as the expert panel process with the reserve training coordinators. So facilitating a couple different levels of transfer with this project. So hopefully these short project snapshots give you a sense of the diversity of activities and potential users that are possible with science transfer projects. I'm going to pause now and transfer the baton to Megan, who's going to offer a few additional tips and resources, and then we'll respond to questions.
Thanks, Lynn. So hi, everyone. We'll just wrap things up here with some tips for developing strong science transfer proposals. Here on the slide, you'll see we've highlighted some important and major components of all proposals. And I'll kind of step through some tips under each as you're thinking about developing those components of your proposal. So when you're thinking about the objective and end user need, we really encourage you to keep it simple, clear, and focused. Really try to find an organized way to identify those primary end users and be clear about their connection to the issue that the work is addressing. And be really specific about how that user will benefit from the project. As you're moving on to the outputs and outcomes section of the project or the proposal, make sure that you distinguish between outputs. So those are the specific products or events that you can point to, and also the outcomes, the bigger impacts you're trying to achieve. Make sure that you clearly connect the dots between the need of your end users, how the project outputs will benefit those users, and how the use of the outputs will lead to the desired outcomes. And don't assume that reviewers will understand something that's only implied, vague, or loosely connected. Make it really clear about, why these outputs are important and meaningful to the users and how you'll achieve those outcomes. As you're thinking about presenting your project approach, we encourage you to be specific about the technical methods as well as your approach for fostering good communication and collaboration among team members and end users. When possible, explain why you've chosen a particular approach. That matters a whole lot to reviewers in understanding how the work is going to come together. So, for example, explain, why focus groups are needed if that's something you're proposing to do, or why an existing group of stakeholders could provide sufficient end user input for your project. As you're presenting your team, briefly explain the roles of individual team members. Team CVs can be customized to demonstrate that individuals have the right background for the proposed work. And this last section here, overall proposal presentation, is something to keep your eye on too. Make sure that your proposal adheres to all of the guidelines in the RFP. We're pretty clear about all the sections we want to see in the proposals, how it should be organized, and how it should be formatted. And as you might expect, proposals with sloppy formatting or grammatical mistakes don't review as well, even if the ideas are compelling. Reviewers want to see a clear and compelling proposal, and how you present that matters. And as we're wrapping up here, I just wanted to point you to a couple of resources on our site. You can browse our project catalog and set the filter to just look at the science transfer projects to get a sense for the variety of potential project approaches and topics that have been funded to date. So explore science transfer projects that have preceded this RFP and get to know the variety of work that's happened. Check out our webinar series. Our January webinar featured a great example of a science transfer project, and you can look at the slide deck associated with that webinar or listen to the recording. And later, in about a month, on February 25th, there will be another webinar that's profiling a science transfer project. That'll be wrapping up later this spring, called Resilience Dialogue. So lots of opportunity to check out existing and prior science transfer projects to help you understand the opportunity and hone your ideas. And please feel free to reach out to us directly with any questions about this RFP. You see our contact information listed there and also in the RFP. So I think I'll hand it back over to Jen.
Thank you very much, Megan and Lynn. Appreciate you offering some additional insights here. So we're at that stage now where you have an opportunity to ask questions. We're going to start first with the questions that are in that have been typed in. And then if you can raise your hand, if you have an additional question, we will call on you. We can unmute you and you can ask your question. Or if you're a little shy, just go ahead and type it in. But we'll start with, I know we have at least one that was offered during the course. Can you read that for me, Lynn?
Yeah, sure. The question about data collection here. Would developing and employing a survey to other reserves to collect information data be considered data collection that is supported under this RFP?
So that's a very interesting question. It all depends on what the use of the information is for. So if you're intending to survey reserves in order to scope a tool or to develop a product, then that would be appropriate. If you're collecting data because you have a research question in mind, this is not that opportunity. You would want to put that kind of project or proposal into our collaborative research or catalyst opportunities. So hopefully that clarified everything for you. Do we have another question?
So another question here. How many proposals did you receive in the last round of transfer grants? And any sense for how many you might get this round?
I think it was about a dozen or so that we received last time.
Yes, and we don't really have a sense of how many we might receive this time. Sorry.
Good questions, but we're not sure. Each time looks a little different.
Yes.
So a question here about end users. Do you require external end users outside of the reserve system?
So that's a great question. I think a lot of our examples showed external end users, but they're not required. I don't think we had an example of a project that was just an internal, for example, from research coordinator to educator, but that would be totally appropriate, kind of a project for a science transfer project, or from one reserve to another that didn't bring in external users. That would also be appropriate. So not required. Great question. Thank you.
Looks like Vitaly is raising a hand. I'm gonna just.
Yeah, Vitaly, we're gonna try and unmute you.
I have a question about the scope of research which can be done during this project if it's funded. Our goal is to transfer a new tool, a new instrument to several other reserves, and we already made some pilot deployments here at Wacoy Bay, then at Wells, and at in South Carolina as well. And I wonder if like writing some kind of summary of that, writing this up, preparing as a part of this project, preparing the peer review publication, is it can it be part of the project or not? Or...
I think I understand. You're asking if you could use resources under the science transfer to write up the results from your pilot deployment. Would you be writing those up for the purpose of publication?
Yes.
Yeah, so this opportunity is not meant to support that kind of research-based work, but more if you wanted to deploy or transfer the technology or the methodologies from those reserves that you mentioned to other reserves in the system, or use the data that you collected, sounds like maybe under the research sector to maybe to the education sector to develop curriculum or something like that. But this is not a research opportunity per se. It's a transfer of either methods or tools or a body of knowledge that exists to another purpose.
But I see. But how about writing some sort of a manual for the tool and some application notes? And,
so more applied use of that information
yes.
to generate applications. So that should probably be appropriate. The goal is always for the use of the science. So keep that in mind as you scope the project, because that's what the reviewers will be looking for.
I see. So, for example, preparing the like manual on the kind of deployment strategy, and maybe teaching the other reserve coordinators how to properly assess the land and make deployments, some kind of guidelines or best practice
Yes,
documents, something like that.
that does
That's
sound
the,
appropriate.
oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, thanks. That's
Well, thank you. It's a great question.
Okay, thanks.
We have another here, another question here. Can the funding be used to fund external partners to participate?
So can funding go to external partners? Yes, it can. It would be a subcontract that you would have, and the purpose would need to support them in specifically achieving the activities and goals of the project. But yes, that's not a problem.
And I think the only caveat is federal employees and agencies are not eligible to receive funding. Well, they can participate, but they can't receive funding. So that's the caveat there.
That's true. These are federal dollars, so they cannot support federal employees or other federal programs.
And some projects have done things like honorariums and things. They're a little different than a subcontract as another vehicle to support participation of partners, if that's more appropriate.
And that's a good point.
The question here about the schedule of science transfer grant opportunities over the next 5 years. Will this RFP be offered more than once a year or every year?
So our goal is to offer it 4 times over the course of the 5 years. There's a sort of 5th year where we can't offer it because that's our last year of that particular cooperative agreement. So you would look for it, I think next year we're planning to do it in the fall. So start looking for the announcement probably in September, October-ish. That will be our goal, to release it in the fall then for next year.
Of 2020.
Of 2020, yes. So I guess that's this year.
Here's another question. Would it be a disadvantage to submit 2 unrelated proposals from one lead reserve?
I don't think it's a disadvantage. I do know that we have the potential to select projects sort of out of order of that they're given to us by the panel, if they're all good fundable projects, in order to ensure that no reserve leads more than one proposal for a single reserve project. But in the submittal stage, it doesn't reduce your chances for one of those projects to be selected. So good question.
Yeah, another way we talk about this question, we get it a lot, is you can certainly submit as many as you like, but you're unlikely to be funded for more than one of them. It's possible, but it's unlikely that you'd be funded for more than one proposal that you are serving as the lead reserve.
In the case of it's only your reserve. There is an exemption for reserves that are leading projects that involve 3 or more reserves. So you could lead a multi-reserve proposal, and you could lead one that's just for your reserve. You could be selected for funding for those 2 types of opportunities.
I wonder, we still got this outstanding question from Taryn. Do you want to try to speak up again? Taryn, on our end, it looks like you're unmuted.
My question, I think, was similar to the one you just answered. Maybe I misconstrued the RFP, but it sounded as though each NERRS can only be the lead on one proposal, which made me think that you couldn't submit multiple proposals per reserve.
Yeah, so you can submit multiple proposals but as Megan pointed out, it's unlikely that you would be selected to lead projects. You'd be funded for more than one. Although it's possible, it's unlikely.
Okay, thank you.
You are very welcome. These have been some great questions. We're capturing all of the questions and responses to go into the online Q&A. Also note that when we receive an email question or if someone calls us with a question, we also add that to the Q&A. So it's kind of a rolling set of questions and responses that you should probably keep your eye on as you're working through your proposal. If you have a question that comes up, check that first. Chances are someone may have already asked that question and the response is already there. That's particularly helpful if you're working on something in the depths of the night when we might not be at our desk to respond immediately. So I encourage you to keep an eye on that and check it out. Just wanted to let folks know we'll probably stay on for another few minutes as you're digesting responses you've heard or taking another quick move through the RFP and a question comes up, but we'll probably wrap up here probably like quarter after the hour. Encourage you to reach out to us at any point when you have any questions. If they don't occur to you during this time, we will be sure to respond. It looks like we have another one.
Yeah, a question here about, do you encourage people to resubmit a proposal that does not get funded?
That's a great question. So part of what we try and do with the review process and the sort of feedback that is provided by the reviewers is to be as constructive as possible so that good ideas that maybe for one reason or other didn't quite make it over the top and one competition teams could have the opportunity to consider that input and improve their proposal. So I don't know if encourage is the right word, because of course we cannot guarantee that just because a team has done everything that they received from the last set of reviewers' comments that they will be funded, because it's a whole new competition. But if it's a great idea and you've got excellent users who are interested in the work, you should definitely go ahead with and resubmit. All right, well, listen, thanks everybody. Got about a minute left here. We're going to wrap up. As I said, please reach out to us. Contact info is in the RFP. It's on the website. We're always happy to have great questions, and we're really looking forward to seeing the proposals as they come in the door. So thank you for your time and attention this afternoon, and don't hesitate to reach out to us. Good luck in your proposal writing. Thank you very much.